I'd like to introduce Jean Therriault. Jean has been a lifelong Alaskan and Fairbanksan, or North Polean. So I think most of the people in this room know Jean for the work that he's been doing to support this community for many, many years. He joined the Alaska State Legislature at age 32, working both in the Senate and in the House initially, and then working his way up in the Senate to eventually be Senate President, which is actually when I first met Jean. And when I first met Jean, I realized right away that he was somebody very engaged in energy issues. He had a lot of really thoughtful questions. At the time, we had a lot of discussions about biomass and the applicability for interior energy options related to that, and he'd put a lot of thought and effort into that particular question. He then moved to the governor's office to work on energy policy related issues, and I also had the chance to work with him there. Again, just really appreciated his open-minded approach to trying to understand what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, and how we can best serve the interior and Alaska as a whole in terms of our energy needs in the state and the resources that we have available and how to maximize our use of those. More recently, Jean took a role at Golden Valley Electric Association as a vice president. Did that for a couple years, working on, I'm sorry, Jean, I should have read a little bit more closely, but you were in charge of resource development and external affairs? Is that? Working in Juneau and with the public, and so did that for a couple of years before he took his current position with the Alaska Intertie Authority in a new deputy director position, working again on policy issues. And I do actually have he is currently the deputy director of statewide energy policy development. And one thing I also appreciate is that, tell me if I'm wrong, but you are the only AEA employee that I know that has ever lived in Fairbanks. And so you're somebody that really understands the interior issues, and I think that that's really great that the agency has allowed that. So thank you, and it speaks well for you that they allowed you to stay here in Fairbanks and work for the authority. So with that, I'd like to introduce you and bring you up. So, and I think we'll try to save questions. How do you want to do questions, Jean? Do you want to wait? Save the questions for the end. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gwen, and I also appreciate the fact that the administration has allowed me to hold this position. Actually, when I was first brought into the position, because the cost of energy had gone up so high in interior, and policymakers, both in the administration and in the legislature, were looking for, how do we move forward on some answers in interior Alaska, knowing that there were going to be a number of big projects going through the system. They wanted somebody that was in Fairbanks. I do spend quite a bit of time on Alaska Airlines. I consider the 737 to be my bus to work quite often, but I'm glad that I am able to still, maintain my presence here in Fairbanks. Also, to let you know, my boss, Sarah Fisher-Goad, actually lived for a stretch of time here in Fairbanks, as have a number of other people at AEA, but right now I am the only person in the organization that actually does live in Fairbanks. I've got, what I've done here is gathered up three updated slide packets on big energy projects that are of importance to interior Alaska. The first one is the Susitna project. The next one is the LNG trucking project, and the third one is proposed upgrades to the transmission system in the rail belt. What I'd like to do, because I think I've got about 45 slides here, is kind of go through them. I wasn't sure who all would show up tonight and whether I needed to really go back to basics. And so some of the slides I might go through fairly quickly before we get to the question and answers. So let's see here. Not sure which way. Okay, just a quick overview on the Susitna project. It, of course, is a large hydroelectric project that has been considered for a number of decades now. It's quite a bit smaller in its current incarnation than what was proposed in the early 80s. Back then, it could have been a dam or series of dams that would produce up to 1,800 megawatts of power. Right now, the project that's being advanced by AEA through the regulatory process is for 600 megawatts. There's a thought amongst the railbelt utilities that is much better sized to fit into to interact with the existing generation, whereas the one previous it could have been more power than really the utilities could have integrated into the system at that time. The 600 megawatts is basically, on a yearly basis, half of the rail belt's electric needs on a yearly basis in the current system. So you can see it's not a project that just overwhelms every other source of generation in the rail belt. It would hopefully dovetail really nicely with the other sources of generation that we have or could have in the future. It is quite a ways up the Susitna River. You can see here that the dam actually, Devil's Canyon is 22 to 32 miles, or the site for the dam is 22 or 32 miles upriver from Devil's Canyon. And Devil's Canyon, actually, you'll see from some of the field data that has been gathered on the fisheries, actually acts as a little bit of a natural barrier to the fisheries because the choke point there, the volume of water gets up so high that not very many of the fisheries species can actually make it up beyond the dam. And so we're hoping that that actually plays into the questions, the concerns that the regulators have, and the design that we have to come up with to basically answer the questions that are being posed right now. This gives you an idea just geographically, again, where the dam site is and the three possible access routes into the dam site. And right now the estimated cost is $5.2 billion. That's a sizable amount of money. And a good chunk of that is actually the civil works that it would take to actually get access to the dam site. Here in the state of Alaska, not only traditional sources of power, but alternative sources of power like hydro and other things, wind energy possibility, is not always located where we have the demand for the power. And Susitna project is a perfect example of that. We've got to go quite a ways upriver where there really isn't a lot of infrastructure right now to get the dam site constructed. And then, of course, there's the ongoing operation. These three access routes, you can see the northern one coming in off the Denali Highway. That's a little bit longer, but one of the things that we have to consider is whose land it crosses, how much land it crosses, what's the terrain, how much wetlands is involved. And when you go through your NEPA process, they're going to have questions like that. So the state can't just pick its the route of access that it wants right now and just say, well, that's the one we're going with, because in that permitting process, at the very least, even if we have a preferred alternative, they're going to ask us questions about, well, that's fine, that's your ideal source of access, but it impacts wetlands. Was there another alternative that had less impact that would have been feasible? So that's a lot of the work that is going on will help answer those questions as we zero in on which route actually will be developed to get access to the project and also be used for getting the power then transmitted out to the Railbelt Intertie system. The land ownership in this area is quite the checkerboard. We've got state land, we have federal lands, we have Native Village Corporation land, we've got subsurface Native ANCSA Corporation rights in this area. So it's all a real mixture. And although some of the Native corporations that are involved up there, or the village corporations, it wasn't sort of their traditional village lands. With some it was, but with some of them, when it came time for them to select lands, they knew that this had been identified as a potential site for a project, decades ago, and so they selected land in this area, hoping that at some time it would be part of a project and they would be able to drive, economic benefit off of it. So right now, that's one of the things that we're dealing with in the getting clearance on the land access issues, which became a bigger and bigger issue with the governor as we came through this year, not having all of the access that we needed to all of the corporation lands. The governor made it real clear that that was a big part of the reason for him sort of pulling back in the budget for this project. It was a clear message that until we get access to those lands to complete our field work, there's no issue about whether we're going to go ahead with this project. We really have to get access to the lands for the remainder of the studies, and then of course get to a closure on a long-term access and use of the land that will actually be used for the siting of the dam, and of course the inundation of land underneath the reservoir. So those are the two big land issues going forward. We need full access to the certain lands to do the remainder of the field studies that are required, and then the long-term issue with use of lands. And I can tell you that since November, December, we've had a number of very, very productive meetings with the stakeholders with regards to the use of land. They have banded together and are negotiating with the state as a group, and that's been very helpful. And we are very hopeful that within the next 60 days or so that we will be able to jointly announce that we've gotten at least closure to the land access issues that are necessary to complete the studies to support an application. This is an artist rendering. Let me see if I can just move that. Artist rendering of the project that was just recently done. You can see, again, a fairly narrow valley. The resulting reservoir behind the dam is a mile or two wide at its widest point and 42 miles long. So a long, narrow reservoir. This just gives you a highlight of some of the work that was done in this field season. It was a very productive field season. And keep in mind that back in the 80s, when the project was worked on, there was a tremendous body of information that was gathered up. When the project was put on hold at that time, that information was cataloged and stored. And we're finding now that as we're back out in the field, pretty much the ecosystem is operating primarily the same way it was back in the 80s. So although it wasn't the type of thing that we could just say, well, we're just going to go back, dust off the information from the 80s and base our application on that. But having that information, now that 30 years later, we're going back out into the field, updating information, being able to point out to regulators that what we saw in the 80s is, how it matches up with what we're seeing in the field now is very good information to have. It helps us to answer a number of questions and also to focus our efforts. You can see we've had a number of people, not that many of them AEA, most of them consultants, out in the field this summer. Majority of the workers with boots on the ground are Alaskans. And the studies that we've gone on are the 58 studies that are mentioned here that was a part of a study plan that we had to submit to FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, get their permission, or basically their blessing on our proposed plan to do the studies as being adequate to gather the information to back up our application, our licensing application. So I know a number of times I've heard people say, enough already with the studies, let's just get on and build something. This is a federal regulatory process. They're the ones that control that process. We're not studying just for studying's sake. We believe, in fact, because they have approved that particular study plan, those are the studies that need to be done before we can actually submit our licensing application. Just to give you an idea that although a number of people, I think that we're just out there in the summer season, you can see that it is a full gamut of studies, winter studies. You can see on the right-hand side here the ice buildup in the spring. So we've also got to study how the ecosystem breaks up in the spring, how the ice goes down, what impact the dam will have if the flow of water is changed at different times during the year, how that impacts the ice that builds up, how that impacts the breakup in the spring. All of that has to be studied. We need to look at the operation of the ecosystem year-round, not just in the summer when the water flows freely. The fish studies, very robust fish studies, as you can imagine. Here in the state of Alaska, we're very sensitive to the fish life cycle. And that's one thing, I've got a slide a little bit later here that talks about tagging adult fish as they come back to the fishery so we can track them to see where it is that they migrate to and where they actually spawn. But our investigation of the fish is actually the full life cycle of the fish. So you can see here we've got different nets in different parts of the river, gathering up the small fingerlings and smolts at different times of the year. So again, we can get a real picture of the fishery year-round in this particular drainage. This is the slide that I indicated how we are now tagging fish and then tracking them as they go back up into the drainage. You can see in 2012 we tagged 352 Chinook salmon. They were tagged. Then we had 23 of them that went up to Devil's Canyon, 10 of them that went up beyond the canyon, and 4 of them that were above the site for the dam. So a relatively small number there in 2012 of the fish that were actually tagged. In 2013, we tagged twice as many Chinook salmon, and you can see the resulting numbers again of where they actually went to up in the river system. It's my understanding that this, again, is matching up pretty closely with what was found in the 1980s as far as the fish coming into the drainage, but then where do the fish actually go to spawn? And the view is that they actually go up into the tributaries, into the main stem of the Susitna, or into the side branches and side sloughs, but it's primarily down below Devil's Canyon. It's my understanding that we actually tracked some of the fish up above the canyon, but then ultimately a number of those fish then went down below where the dam site would be down below the canyon before they actually spawned. Not only fisheries are important, but also the other wildlife that inhabits this area. You can imagine wildlife in the state of Alaska is not necessarily hindered by a water body, but if we're going to change the characteristics, the depth, the width of the water body, we do want to understand how that potentially impacts migrating animals in that area. And so you can see here during the winter months, different animals are being tagged so that they can be tracked. This gives you an idea of just one cross-section of the river and all the different work that is going on. You can see different plots laid out in the main stem of the river. Then we've got delineation of different oxbows that come off the river, side sloughs, and what we've got to do is track all of the water resource, the fisheries resource in all of those portions of the river, including the groundwater that comes in, feeds some of those side sloughs, and then ultimately makes its way into the main channel. We've got many of these sites plotted, and again, you can just see the complexity of the field study, the work that's being gathered, and then to answer the questions that are being raised about the potential impact and things that can be done to mitigate any potential impact. This just gives you an idea of the very long process that we're in and where we are in that process. We're still relatively at the beginning of the process. It is very lengthy. You have to do a lot of work, again, to gather up scientific information to back up your application submittal to FERC. You can see here we're into the pre-application phase, putting that together. The target at this point is to submit the application in 2016. The anticipation is that it would probably be a year and a half for FERC to make its decision. And all along that route, there's interaction with different stakeholders, with the state, on design parameters. There could be additional requests from the federal regulators to gather additional information before you actually potentially get the license. And then it is most likely a 6-year construction project to get the infrastructure actually constructed. Again, you probably have a year or two of the civil work just to get out to the site, stage all of your equipment for the construction project, then the construction project itself, and the associated transmission to wheel that power out to the rail belt transmission system. The economics, we have hired a financial advisor to do an independent analysis of the work that has been done by the state agency. And at this point, they have looked at the information that we have submitted and determined that the project appears to be economic and financeable to them at this point. They have looked over our original assumptions in doing so, and they're now going to develop their own financial model so they can continue to crunch numbers for us going forward. This just gives you an idea of the expected cost of power out of the infrastructure, and I probably need to explain a few things here. You see that first year rate in 2024 of 18 cents per kilowatt hour. At AEA, because we're not able to make policy calls on how the infrastructure could be financed. So what we do is we run numbers as if there is no state assistance in this project. Even though right now the state is undertaking all of making capital appropriations for all of the work that we're doing in gathering up the scientific information, when we run our numbers, what we do is consider that all the upfront funding is then capitalized at the time of construction and rolled into the long-term debt. Now, if legislators or the governor want to forgive the money that was spent up front in developing project, that's a policy call they can make. If they want to move forward on a financing with a financing similar to what was done on Bradley Lake, the other sizable hydro facility that the state owns down in the Homer area, they could do that, but that's a policy call for the governor and the legislature to make at some time. So we, the state agency, we don't make that call. We run the project as if there is no state assistance, and then we just consider that if in fact policymakers make a call for state assistance to pay down the debt or help with financing, then the numbers just get better. So you can see in 2024 dollars, the first power out of the dam with the all of the costs being financed is 18 cents. If you then bring that back into a 2013 dollar, so you can compare it to today's power, that would be just under 14 cents per kilowatt hour. Then if you really start using financing tools to stretch out the mortgage, basically, on that infrastructure, you can see as you stretch that out over longer and longer periods of time, the cost per kilowatt hour come down. And the one thing that you have to keep in mind with hydro generation in particular, it really is a multi-generational asset. You know, unlike a gas-fired turbine that maybe has a life of 30 years, then you've got to either rebuild it, replace it. Hydro, you can expect, in fact, the first licensing will be for 50 years, a 50-year period of time. You would expect then to go in for relicensure of that, and you may be able to do that one or two times. So we're talking about building infrastructure here that should be, or could very well be generating power 120 to 150 years from now with just annual maintenance and perhaps every now and then, you know, upgrading of your turbine technology. So it just sort of shows you, you know, long-term assets and the benefit that you can get by stretching out the payment. And really in the utility world, you want to, as best as possible, have the constituent, the consumer that gets the benefit of the asset to pay for their share of the asset at that time. And so generally what you're trying to do in utilities with financing is really finance them over a long period of time, because in particular with hydro, somebody 50 years from now is going to get the benefit or some of the benefit from that asset. And you don't want to have burdened the people in the first 20 years or 30 years with paying it all off, so the person in year 50 gets the free ride if at all possible. You want to spread that cost over a longer period of time. And with hydro, because it is such a long-term asset, there's more of an opportunity to do that. At this point, though, we have not crunched any numbers beyond the 50-year financing. This gives you an idea of how we compared the power out of Susitna then, after we've gone through this process of estimating what the cost of each kilowatt hour could be, to natural gas generation out of Cook Inlet. And what we've done here is the black line represents the Cook Inlet gas price, and I believe our starting point was gas being used to generate power in Cook Inlet at about $6.50 per MCF of gas. And then we have it being escalated over time. The gray shaded area here is just to try to give an idea of the potential volatility in the price of gas going forward. We can sort of come up with a formula and, you know, escalate it for the inflation purposes over time, but we really don't know what's going to happen because gas is a commodity and commodity prices do yo-yo up and down. But to the best of our ability, we've tried to give a view here of what we expect the competing cost of power would be if it was generated using natural gas in the Cook Inlet area. And you can see, just like your monthly mortgage, if you got a mortgage on your home, the payment, the cost of power, which is the largest portion of power, the capital component for the infrastructure is just as flat as can be going forward until it's ultimately paid off. And then the cost, the financing drops away, and then all you've got is your annual maintenance cost because the fuel for the project is free. So you can see that we reach a crossover point. In this calculation, the crossover point was after 12 years, and then beyond that, you would expect hydropower to be cheaper than your other sources of power, and the one that we've compared to here is natural gas. Now, at my morning presentation, somebody said, well, what about the natural gas that we hope to have come off the North Slope with the trucking project, which I'll cover here next? We're hopefully going to get access to natural gas. Hopefully Golden Valley will be signing up as a bulk consumer of that, so it's part of the natural gas is used to spin power. But if it's coming off of a trucking project, we know that that's going to be more expensive than the current Cook Inlet price, and so we would expect that a line for generation off of North Slope gas that is trucked into the community to be substantially higher than this black line. Now, if a large diameter pipeline goes through and it delivers natural gas all up and down the rail belt, that will change the dynamics, and we will have to do some recalculations on that as a potential competing source of energy. The next steps in the licensing and engineering milestones you can see here is to file our initial study report on February 3rd. You may have read the headline just recently about the state going to the federal regulators and asking for a delay. Basically, in what we had going was a 2-year study process. The first full year, real robust year, was 2013. The plan was then to have secure funding from the legislature for the next field season. But after doing the first year, what you have to do is sort of take a deep breath, catalog the information that you gathered up, let the federal regulators know where you are in the process, what modifications that you need to make to your study plan for the next field season, and then go forward. That information was due to FERC under the original plan on February 4th. Because we've had this delay in the budget, the suggestion that we need to slow down and make sure that we get those land issues all ironed out before we really move forward, that has caused us to have a little bit of a delay then in our application to the federal regulators. And so what we'd like to do is supply them with our draft field study report from the 2013, do that on February 3rd, but then delay and do the final of that a little bit later, and then actually have our proposal for the 2015 field season a little bit later in the summer, spring and summer. That will allow us to fully evaluate what all information that we gathered, how it's matching up again to the 1980s information, and then go to FERC after having some consultation with the different stakeholders on the project, and hopefully have a more collaborative proposal on what we think the second full year of field studies needs to capture, what remaining information there is out there that we need to capture. It will also give us some time to start coordinating with the utilities beyond what we already have done, because the utilities will be the customers for this project. The state does not anticipate selling any project from Susitna directly to a consumer. The power will be made available to the utilities, who then wield the power to the consumers. So that wraps up my overview on Susitna, and I'd like to launch right into the LNG trucking project at this point. This is a slide that was developed when the governor first introduced the package for financing the access to gas on the North Slope for interior Alaska last year. The one exception is the middle block there on the top where it says 57.5. When the governor first introduced the package, financing package, he had $50 million there, and the legislature actually coming through their budgeting process bumped that up to 57.5. So you can see it was a suite of financing tools that were made available to ADA to not only take an equity position in the LNG production plant up on the North Slope, but also bring low-cost financing to the plant on the North Slope and also to the distribution, build out of the distribution here in the community that is needed to actually utilize the gas. The goals of the IEP, we're calling the IEP the Interior Energy Project, were to deliver natural gas to interior Alaska at the lowest cost possible to as many Alaskan customers as possible and as soon as possible. The governor, when we have given him periodic updates, continues to ask whether the first delivery out of the plant on the North Slope can happen in the latter part of 2015. We still think that we are on target to achieve that goal, and so the utilities now here are starting to make plans for the build out of their system to receive that new source of energy to put into the distribution system. This just is a little schematic to illustrate the different parts of the plant. You've got the plant on the North Slope, associated, or here we go, the plant on the North Slope and associated storage. The product is then put into trucks, delivered into the interior of Alaska. Again, the liquid is put into storage. It then has to be warmed, re-vaporized, and then it can be piped through a pipe distribution system to industrial and residential users. The fuel that is produced is LNG. It's a cryogenic fuel. It is chilled to minus 262 degrees. So it's not as easy to transport and as easy to use as other liquid fuels, but it is the only way to ship the volumes of LNG other than a pipeline, which we hope will be coming sometime in the future. This just gives you an idea of the proposed plant site up on the North Slope. You can see the small green box there that's shaded in. That is a site that was identified by the ADA team. One of the other proposers for the plant up in the North Slope had selected a site right next door, and the third proposer had an original site that was a little bit of a distance from here, sort of mixed more in the existing infrastructure in the Dead Horse area. And there was some concern with that, and ultimately all of the three different proposers agreed that a site in this general location with its fairly short access to the fuel lines up on the North Slope was probably the preferable way to go. The LNG sales priorities as we bring the resource here into town that ADA sort of considered as they advanced the project was that interior residential and commercial space heating was the first target. That is benefited, though, if we can sign up any of the interior utilities, electric utilities, because transmission or transport of any kind of energy, it really is a volume game. The higher you can get the volume, the lower you would hope the per unit cost would go. And so the original target is space heat needs, but if we can also interact with the interior utilities, that was the secondary primary target. Then we've got interior industrial customers, other regulated utilities, and then the open LNG market. Again, we are interested now that we pulled the trigger on who our partner is going to be on the plant as we actually approach the partnering with them, putting all the business deals to get the plant constructed. The plant then is going to be looking for customers, and the larger we can grow that customer base, as long as we are covering the needs of those residential and commercial space heat needs and the electric utilities, then any other use is just a larger volume. Hopefully then everybody's per unit cost out of the plant goes down. And one of the things in looking at the utilities, both for a distributed piped distribution system and also electric utility system, both of those distribution systems are economically regulated activities. And so therefore the state has much more control on making sure that the lower cost that its participation brings to the product, then there actually is a mechanism to make sure that that lower cost flows through to the ultimate Alaska consumer. This is just a schematic that gives you an idea of all of the different decisions that are being made as we advance the plant and the distribution. The plant is the top section of this. So you can see a lot of different business decisions to be made. A number of them do have checks there, so we have actually reached decisions on a number of them, but others are still pending. And believe me, with a project of this nature, each one of these lines probably has, 5 and 10 other little sub-decisions underneath it. One of the things I'd like to point out is about halfway down in the plant part of the chart, you can see air permitting. And air permitting is one of the long lead time items for this plant. It takes 12 to 18 months to get the required air permitting done for the plant up on the North Slope. And the other long lead time items are long lead equipment procurement. And that's one of the items that is just under the air permitting. This is an indication of what the state was able to do as far as shouldering some of the risk. If it was just a private sector developer that was building this plant, they probably would not have pulled the trigger on actually moving forward with building the plant or starting to gather up things to build the plant until they actually had their air permit in hand. And they also certainly would not have pulled the trigger on ordering any of the long lead time components of the liquefaction plant until they had those air permits in hand. That's one of the areas where the state actually can shoulder some of the risk of getting into the production queue for some of the manufacturers on those components. If everything were to go to pieces and the plant didn't go forward for some reason, the state would be able to sell that right, their position in that production queue, but probably would not recoup all of their money. And so that's, again, one of the areas that the state, in order to keep on target for that 2015 date, was willing to come in, actually purchase a position in that production queue, maintain that, and then hopefully we'll hand that off then to the company the consortium that comes together to actually build the plant. Down on the distribution side, you can see one of the items that now has a check mark in it is the RCA, the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, actually making a decision on which of the utilities would get the expansion territory outside of Fairbanks Natural Gas's existed certificated service area. FNG's current area is pretty much the core of Fairbanks. It's sort of a box here that I'll show you later, and which encompasses about 65 to 70% of the total space heat need within the Fairbanks North Star borough. So you can see it's in the whole borough within the high and medium density areas. It's sort of the small chunk, but the lion's share of the demand is concentrated in that core area. Just at the ADA board meeting this month, the decision was made to actually pick the preferred partner to move forward. The proposals had been narrowed down to 3 different proposers. We had Fairbanks Natural Gas and their parent company. Pentex had put in a proposal. Spectrum, a gentleman by the name of Ray Latcham, who was involved in Fairbanks Natural Gas, the initial build-out of his system, had put in a proposal. And then a company called MWH put in a proposal. What the board decided was that their preferred partner in the project was MWH due to, I think, a number of things. The strength, engineering strength they brought to the project, the financial strength they brought to the project, their blend of equity dollars that they put in and the financing that they were willing to bring to the project resulted in the lowest overall cost of capital to the project, which again helps to lower the price of the product being produced. So what the board did is they instructed the ADA team to move forward to try and close the deal with MWH. If for some reason that effort faltered, their second selection was FNG and their parent company, and then third would be Spectrum. The reasons that MWH was selected and a number of things that weighed on the board's decision was which of the proposals helped achieve the overall compliance with the Senate Bill 23 financing package. That was the package that was introduced by the governor last year and actually helped to spur the build out of the distribution system and achieve the goals that the state had put forward. The ADA staff actually had recommended MWH, and I think it's important to point out that as we reach the last round of negotiations or interactions with the three different proposers, both personnel from Golden Valley and also personnel from IGU, the Interior Gas Utility, which the RCA had granted the right to serve the expansion territory in the borough. They both had personnel that participated in that last round of interaction with the proposers. And the day before, or a couple of days before the board actually met to receive the staff's recommendation, both IGU and FNG, as possible customers for the plant, sent in individual letters of recommendation, also recommending MWH be selected. Let's see, I think I want to just skip through this one. We're now moving forward to, by the end of this month, get a negotiated letter of intent signed with MWH, and then finally the project development agreement by March 15th of this year. So you can see that we're trying to move forward, again, keeping in mind of that Gantt chart with all the different decision tracks there to close the deal with our partner rather quickly so that they can then take over and move forward actually in conjunction with the state on all those different decisions. This gets you now to a picture of the distribution area. And the red shaded box there is Fairbanks Natural Gas's current distribution territory. They have got, I think it's about 70 miles of pipe in that area, and AEA put together a proposed or supposed distribution system that would serve the high and medium density customers in this overall shaded area. And our determination was that within the red area, we need another 131 miles of pipe. So that additional 131 miles of pipe will allow then that customer base that represents 65 to 70% of the overall space heat needs within the borough would be able to be served off that additional 130 miles of pipe. Out in the green area, now the horseshoe that sort of goes around the red area, that is the service territory that was granted to IGU, and our own independent analysis of the miles of pipe that would be needed to serve the customer base in the high and medium density area is 633 miles. So you can see 30% of the demand, almost 3 times as much pipe. So that just tells you, it gives you an idea of the economic challenge of using all of the tools that the state brought to be able to get the distribution system built out to serve that customer area. At AEA, we did do an estimation of what we thought a 6-year build out would be. We actually believe that within the red area, that build out can actually take place if FNG hits the ground running and moves forward aggressively in probably 2 or 3 years. In the larger area, I know IGU is going to try and put together a proposal to build out as quickly as possible. But when we did our estimation, we started out in the core of North Pole, where IGU hopes to source gas out of a storage facility that would be shared with Golden Valley, building their system out there and probably covering core of North Pole, Badger Road area in 2 or 3 years, and then taking on the rest of the area in years 4, 5, and 6. However, depending on the level of cooperation between the two utilities as they build their system and hopefully plan for the, as much as possible, seamless integration of the two systems so they can support each other as best possible, that might speed up the development or distribution in some of the areas for IGU. Because you can imagine if IGU starts out in North Pole, sort of close to where that number 2 is, but they have a customer here on Chena Ridge that's just outside of FNG's existing service territory. Once FNG gets their area all piped, and a person maybe is in the very next subdivision, but they're in IGU territory. If IGU and FNG have an agreement so that the resource can be developed or delivered to the boundary, custody can then change hands or from one to the next, then it can be delivered, and then IGU doesn't necessarily have to push gas all the way from North Pole up and around the horseshoe. So I know there is a desire to hopefully have that kind of interaction between the utilities, and we're hoping that negotiations between them will allow that to happen. Question?
Do they have the financing for all this infrastructure? Is that part of the package for everything in the red here, or is that, you said it's going to be over 2 or 3 years type thing? But the monies that they have, or they're proposing now, is that in the package for this infrastructure?
Well, we believe that the financing that is available, although the dollars, the actual hard dollar, every last hard dollar needed for it is not there, it allows the build out, certainly in the high density area. You know, FNG will make a proposal to ADA for access to some of those financing dollars. We expect them to bring in equity dollars in addition that help stretch those dollars. And then out in the IGU area, at the very least, there's enough state financing and tools that we have to help get an enterprise up and running. And so then that enterprise then would have the ability to actually finance itself going forward too. So anyway, a blend between, you know, some private sector dollars, some of the other dollars the state brings. The IGU is a creation of the 3 municipalities. They potentially have the ability, once they're up and running, to access money through that kind of mechanism. So we believe that all in that we're able to get this enterprise up and running. Will it finance the last mile of pipe in year 6 if that's what it takes? We're not sure at this point, but we believe by then the enterprise will be able to fund itself too. Now just to get to a document that was developed that's helped us to get a better idea that as we bring this resource through a pipe distribution system into a new subdivision, there's a bit of then social science that takes place as far as how quickly will consumers convert their residences to take advantage of the resource, and how quickly will that boost up demand, because depending on how quickly the consumers adopt it and use it, we want to make sure then the capacity in the plant is there, and through expansions if need be, to actually serve that load. And so as we came through the summer, IGU actually had taken on a telephone survey. Some of you may have gotten a call. I think they called about 800 households in the Fairbanks North Star Borough area, the target area, and hit them with a number of questions about, well, what if your savings were X, but your cost of conversion were Y? Would you make that decision? You know, and the consumer could look to see, okay, well, it's going to cost me X dollars to convert my house. I'll be able to recoup that in 3, 4, 5 years, you know, as they shot different numbers at them. Would the consumer make that decision? Trying to figure out where that sort of sensitive point is where the consumer might say, well, you know, I think I'm just going to hold off, or there might not be enough savings there for me to want to make this conversion. Then the ADA AEA followed up in the summer after getting all of that telephone survey information. We actually had a number of focus groups in town where we could prearrange ahead of time for people to come down and spend, you know, an hour and a half to 2 hours with us talking about, you know, real hard information about this is what we believe. We have found in a survey that the conversion costs are likely to be. Here's your savings, and we asked people to actually take a look at what your heating cost bills were for a calendar year, so that when we engage you, we're not just hitting you with a cold call and, well, I think last year, you know, I spent $5,000, and you know they could actually interact with a little bit more specificity. So we gathered up the information from that focus group, gave it to a firm for some number crunching. They also had gone out and looked at different incentives that had been offered by utilities, by states, by municipalities around the state, around the nation actually, that had actually helped people, spur people on to convert their infrastructure. What we found is that for the majority of people, you know, 60 to 70% of the people, the price savings that we believe we can deliver is enough to incent them to actually make the conversion. But there is a price of getting into the game. You know, if you are completely changing out your boiler system, it could be as high as $9,000 to $11,000. That's a significant amount of money out of pocket for people to come up with. And so what we've looked at is other mechanisms that could help. And what this report suggests is what's called an on-bill financing mechanism has shown to be very meaningful to consumers in other areas. And what that is basically is a financing mechanism that lets you finance that conversion cost. So the consumer can actually make that conversion for their house, and then they make the payments to pay that back over, up to a 10 or 15-year period of time on their monthly utility bill as the gas is delivered to their house. And you'd hope that that financing cost plus the cost of the natural gas itself still allow the consumer to realize sizable savings month to month as they go forward. And we believe that we will be able to deliver the resource at a cost that kind of savings, coupled with that kind of financing mechanism for conversion, will actually help people to convince them to convert, again, because we're looking for more demand sooner, because that helps the overall economics of the plant. And coming through this study, what we've found out is the mechanism itself is more important than the terms of the financing. And I'm sorry, I don't have a graph in here. I probably should add it that indicates that if you are financing, let's say it's a $9,000 conversion, and we figured that 8% financing over a 10-year period of time. The difference, as we took that interest rate then and took it from 8% all the way down to zero, the difference to the consumer on their monthly bill, that actual dollar amount, was actually fairly modest. But the mechanism, the ability to actually make the conversion without a lot of immediate out-of-pocket expense, was the real, the real deal maker for the consumer. And so again, as you take that interest rate and actually ratchet it down, the actual impact of the person's monthly bill was not all that significant. So we believe what it points to is that the mechanism, the ability to do the financing, is actually almost more important than the terms of the financing itself. This study, it's quite lengthy. There's a number of attachments to it, but we really believe that the consultant working on this particular study has done a very good job looking across the nation, sort of ground truthing what we think the study showed here in Fairbanks with what's actually happening in Homer right now as they build out their distribution system, and that we see the percentage of conversion that's happening down there. This graph is just a little bit busy, but what it highlights then is we took information on the estimation of the speed with which people will convert, and then loaded it into some models that we had so we could predict the demand that the plant will have to meet over time. You can see up at the very top there, in 2015, the first set of numbers is F&G's existing customer base. They have some customers that are interruptible customers. If they were serving all those customers on a year-round basis, that's 1.1 BCF, billion cubic feet of gas per year. And you can see once they actually get access in 2015 to a larger resource coming into the system, they can actually sign up another half BCF of demand distributed out to customers. And then as they build out that 131 miles of pipe, you can see how their demand grows rather quickly over time as they serve that red shaded area in the core of Fairbanks. Then we get down to the IGU territory here on the bottom, and you can see in 2015, they actually don't have any demand in 2015. The product is available off the plant the latter part of that year, but they're really starting from scratch. They don't have any existing distribution pipe in the ground that they can quickly hook up more customers once the commodity is available. So their demand actually presents itself a little bit later, starting slowly in 2016 and then taking off in 2017 and 2018. We've added those two together so that we can look at the plant demand by year down here on the bottom, and that is the yearly demand that the plant will have to meet. But you have to keep in mind that plant, most of the demand is in the winter. In the summer month, we're not heating our homes that much. We might be doing a little domestic hot water off the boiler system, but the demand for the plant is very cyclical due to our heating seasons. And so what we've got here, the green bar here on the bottom then, takes that yearly demand and does a quick multiplication to say, okay, we've got in 2016 just under 3 BCF of demand. However, to meet the wintertime component, we really have to have some spare capacity in that plant so that we can throttle up to actually meet the big peak demand in the winter before we go into the summer season. So that's what you see down on the bottom is the estimation of the plant, then working in association with some storage here in the community, what capacity you would need in the plant to make sure that you are able to meet not only your yearly demand, but your peak winter demand out of the plant. Well, that's the end of the LNG, and now I'd like to just launch right into a discussion on some transmission work that we've been doing. Here in the interior Alaska, or in the rail belt of Alaska, we have as much of a transmission system as anywhere else in the state of Alaska. It goes the 580 miles from Fairbanks down to Homer. The Bradley Lake Hydro facility, which is owned outright by the state of Alaska, is down in Homer. And that power, each of the rail belt utilities has a share of that power. Some of it is wheeled up to interior Alaska and distributed through the Golden Valley system. When that power first came online, it was not the cheapest source of power in the rail belt. But for the past, 15, maybe 20 years, it's been one of the cheapest sources. And that gives you an idea, again, about the power of hydro, that very flat cost of power, because your cost of power is not going up and down with the cost of a fuel commodity. The fuel actually behind the dam is free. What you're doing is just making that monthly mortgage payment on that infrastructure. However, the system that we've got that runs all the way down to Homer is a bit of a balkanized system. Portions of it were owned outright by the different utilities. The state helped with construction of that, of some portions of it that the utilities now own. And also the state actually owns 170 miles between Healy and Wasilla outright. That portion of the intertie is owned by the state. It's operated through a conjunction, or in conjunction with the utilities through an enterprise called the Intertie Management Committee. The AEA actually oversees the operation or the ownership of that infrastructure, and I actually am the voting member on that IMC as decisions are made for the maintenance, upkeep, and operation of that portion of the intertie. And pretty much the interaction of that IMC on the intertie is the closest thing that we have in the state of Alaska to a body that makes decisions on the way the intertie system in the rail belt should be operated. That is the one sort of formalized groups through the state ownership and the contractual arrangements that we have with the utilities that get together, debate out, hash out how open access is to be achieved for that portion of the intertie, what the rules of engagement, the rules of the road for using that portion of the intertie. But our power really is limited to that's 173 miles of intertie. The utilities, though, then over time, they adopt those rules generally and apply them to their individual systems. But not all utilities have done that, nor does the state have the power at this point to force the utilities to do that. So it's a little bit like having a highway system that goes from Fairbanks down to Homer. But the state doesn't really have the power to set what the speed limits are, what the merging on and off the highway are. To the best of our ability, we do that through the operation of this IMC, but we've got some governance issues on the operation of that overall transmission system that we're trying to work out. And that system, because it came into being as the utilities grew their individual systems, got closer, and at some points the utilities actually touched each other and linked up give each other support, and in other areas, the state actually made appropriations to make those linkages between the utilities. And so the system is actually fairly frail compared to a transmission system in the lower 48. And we've undertaken a study over the last year to year and a half looking at suggested improvements to that system so that we could get to greater capacity and ability to wheel power up and down the rail belt, and also get to a higher level of reliability on the system as that power is wheeled. I mean, just recently we've had some outages here in interior Alaska as portions, that portion of the intertie, the Alaska Intertie, that 170 miles of wire, tripped off for a particular reason. That cuts us north of the Alaska Range completely loose from the generation and the source of power that we like to get out of South Central. If we had a parallel line there, hopefully we wouldn't lose all of that connection if one portion of the line experienced problems. As we came through this evaluation, it was a firm called EPS, a gentleman named Dave Burlingame, who used to work in the Chugach system. And I think most of the utility managers up and down the rail belt understand and agree that Mr. Burlingame has a pretty good understanding of the way the intertie system in the rail belt works. He came up with an estimation of down on the southern end, from Anchorage down to the Bradley Lake facility, that's currently experiencing some bottlenecks. You can see we call it the Unconstraining Bradley projects. They total up to $402 million. You know, if we were to put in our ideal transmission system, so all of that hydropower can come up, have a level of reliability in the transmission system. So again, if the single strand of wire that goes down, we're not disconnected from that power source until it's brought back online, that we would be able to see our way through a temporary interruption like that. It would cost $402 million. Within the South Central area, because the utilities down there, MLMP touches Chugach touches MEA, there's not a lot of single line contingency within that area. But as the power comes up to South Central and then needs to be wheeled around South Central, the Mat-Su and Anchorage area, and then through that area up to the interior, there are some substations that would need some modification. It's a fairly modest amount, $20.5 million. And then getting to the northern section, if we were to, again, have a dual capability to ship power up, expand the capacity on the existing line, and so we can get to that level of reliability redundancy, $480 million. So when you add that all up, and I'll get to that slide next, comes up to $903 million. What we then asked Mr. Burlingame to do is take a look at the potential benefit to the consumers if that infrastructure and that capability, that capacity existed today. How much would the consumers benefit from that? And what we did then is we crunched some numbers, and I've got this little disclaimer in here. Again, going back to the same thing when I talked about the financing of a Susitna project, we're not sure what policymakers will want to do as far as financing that infrastructure. So what we did is we just took the cost, we've come up with some different financing scenarios, and we spread that cost across all of the power that is consumed in the rail belt. Again, we don't know that is how the financing will go, but we had to come up with some concept so we could do some of the number crunching. And here, again, come up with the total of $903 million. And then we get to the estimation of, or here are our assumptions going forward. The CapEx cost you see is the 903. The operating cost, the yearly operating cost for that improved system would be $18 million. We've factored in a 5% interest rate and 30-year bonds, the transmission, very long-term asset. And we've then spread those costs over all of the gigawatt hours of energy currently utilized in the rail belt, and then we factored in an inflation factor of 2.5%. What that leads us to believe, though, is that on the low side, there are savings to be reaped from that improved transmission system of $140 million per year. The upper side is as high as $240 million per year. As Mr. Burlingame went through this process and developed the system, developed the projects, we then had him go out and interact with the utilities because he had received information from the utilities about the loads that they serve in their service territories. So we wanted to make sure that his evaluation of how the transmission system would interact with their ability to serve their loads was correct. So he met with the individual utilities. They pretty much gave the thumbs up that they thought he had done a pretty good job of understanding how they would serve their loads and how they would interact with that transmission system. I have noticed recently, as I've been at different seminars presenting with some of the utility CEOs, they have chosen to use a savings, potential yearly savings of $100 million. They feel that that's a fairly conservative number. But even if it's $100 million per year, if your capital cost to get in the game is $900 million and you achieve savings for the consumer of $100 million a year, the indication is that that's probably something you need to figure out a way to actually move forward on. Now, I know a number of people, in fact, we have been chided on the Susitna project for not having all the cost in for the $5.2 billion that we have estimated for the construction of that infrastructure. And what we have added in is the transmission that would be needed to get the power from the Susitna Dam to the rail belt intertie corridor. But we believe that this transmission upgrade, which would be needed if we were going to wheel all that power to the consumers up and down the rail belt, we believe that this study shows that that upgrade can be a standalone and should be considered a standalone project. So all of the savings, or estimated savings that you see there, are even without the Susitna project being built. So that is just with the generation that was planned or under construction to be in place by the year 2015. Susitna is not in place until the year 2023 or 24. So these savings present themselves with just the existing generation and what will come online by the year 2015, what has already either been contracted or is under a power sales agreement to be contracted. This gives you an idea, again, a look at the savings, or how we estimate those savings present themselves. In year one, you can see in nominal dollars, we believe that there's, on the low side, 1.5 cents to be saved by the consumers for every kilowatt hour that they consume. On the upper side is just south of 4 cents per kilowatt hour. And then as you spread that cost, if you finance that infrastructure over a longer period of time, again, just like your mortgage, you stretch those payments out, the per month charge goes down. And again, under a utility concept, you want as much as possible, the consumer that actually gets the benefit of the infrastructure actually pays for a part of the infrastructure. So the longer you can spread the financing out, you're able to achieve that goal, and you can see then what happens to the savings for the consumer over time if you do that. So the problem right now with this is, under our current rates and tariffs that the utilities operate under, is if this infrastructure all presented itself tomorrow, then the cost to the utilities for serving your load would go down. Those savings then, through the utility rate structure, would flow right through to the consumer. There's no ability at this point for the utility to capture any of that potential savings to actually finance the infrastructure that makes the savings possible. So those are some of the sort of the policy calls that this study sort of tees up for the policymakers down in Juneau to consider. How is it that we try and move forward to bring this infrastructure into being? This is just a view of a different way of charting those savings. You can see the red lines are the actual savings, the high and the low, and then you've got the financing costs down on the bottom, which are the solid blue and the shaded blue area. And clearly between the savings and the cost, there are substantial savings here for the consumer. Our next steps as we move forward, and hopefully I've given you an idea with the beginning slides, we've got not only the capital needs, we've got some governance issues, we've got existing bottlenecks in the delivery system that we'd like to take care of, and we've got, as part of the governance debate, you can see here, reliability standards and open access language. AEA is actually in conjunction with the utilities hammered out some proposed sort of rules of the road that we're applying now to our 170 miles of transmission system. We believe it is sensible to expand the application of those rules to the broader transmission system. It's just that at this point, we don't have the authority to really do so. But we believe if we can move forward on that, it actually is to the benefit of the consumers in the rail belt. And I can tell you, as the voting member on the development of some of these documents, the debate back and forth with the utilities was a bit acrimonious at times, but they, I think, ultimately realized that the state is playing a role to try and make sure that the system is as open as possible, has a reliability that the consumers demand in the receipt and use of electric power in our modern day system, but that the system, as much as possible, be able to accommodate new sources of power going forward. And that actually is my last slide, and I've got 15 minutes to answer questions. So, Mike.
I have two questions. Can the Susitna Dam be expanded or built higher and thereby generating a larger percentage of our rail belt need?
That's one of the things that will be considered in the final design. Depending on how you build the dam, it can lend itself to a future increase by raising of the dam more easily than if you plan for it now. But there's some additional expense on the front end. So those are the things that actually the design team will consider, and that will actually be part of the questioning for the regulators to consider also.
And also, next question is, those last numbers you showed us on the aggregated volumes, it's your last slide with the natural gas. Did those include Golden Valley and Flint Hills and large mines in the interior?
No, they did not. Because that industrial need, number one, is not likely to need the distribution system. It can help to feed a distribution system, but a large industrial user like Golden Valley, the reason they're considering in discussions with IGU to site a storage tank out in North Pole is they can take delivery of that cryogenic fuel right to their site because they're using such a large volume of it that they'll regas it and put it in a pipe right across the road into their turbine. So they don't really need a large distribution system. As in, other large potential industrial users wouldn't necessarily need a distribution system. They might be able to take delivery right to their industrial use of the cryogenic liquid.
Well, it just seems that if that's your most slow demand, we need to plan for those contingencies.
If that demand presents itself, the plant that is being designed on the North Slope is expandable. And I know that was one of the things that was very attractive with the MWH is their expression of a willingness, a desire to actually, expand the plant. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I have 4 questions. First one is Eielson included in that IUG?
It is, however, we did not, see, am I going the right direction? No. We did not draw any miles of pipe in Eielson, figuring that once the resource gets to the military property, if they were actually going to take advantage of it, they would probably put their own pipe in to their facilities. But it is included down in that shaded area.
Number 2 was I remember seeing a documentary years ago on building dams in Iceland. And, you know, frozen water, you know, how it reacts with a dam in Iceland. And I wondered if anybody had checked with Iceland on building dams.
Yes, in fact, MWH, who is one of our consultants on the Susitna project, actually was involved in the last dam, I believe, that was built in Iceland. I forget the name of it. It's Kukura or something like that. We've actually had members of the legislature that have gone and viewed that facility. It's similar. There's a lot of similarities to the Susitna project. It was a remote project. I believe they used roller compacted concrete in its construction. That's being considered here. So there was a lot of similarities, not only with the climate, but the remoteness of the construction project itself.
Third question is, has nuclear ever been considered up here?
Nuclear has been considered in the past. In fact, in 2010, the legislature actually went through the statutes and removed a number of outright, prohibitions of ever considering nuclear power in the state of Alaska. But at this point, it just doesn't appear that the economics are such for it really to have an application. However, smaller scale nuclear, power production is being developed. So we'll see if that develops and ever has a potential application in the state.
Fourth question, a couple of years ago when I came to this meeting in the summer, there was mention of biofuel, and I said, wow, that sounds great. And there was supposed to be a grade school, one of the grade schools somewhere was supposed to convert over to biomass.
Yes.
Did that happen?
Yes, Delta Junction has converted, and I think down in the Tok area.
The one that brought it was Tok,
Yeah.
Right.
And so I know that they, having represented that district in the legislature, I know the communities up and down the Alaska Highway worked together. They got a chipper so that they could share that component to help process the material. And so actually statewide, use of biomass as a source of heat and energy is growing, even down in Southeast.
Yeah, the village of Tanana as well, I think, converted.
Let's see back here.
How much excess propane would be available for rural Alaska once the natural gas plant is completed?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. I should have covered that when I went over one of the slides. The gas stream, the raw gas stream up on the North Slope does have a percentage of propane in it, but it's relatively small. It's like 2 or 3%. So as the gas goes through the plant, we don't manufacture propane, but the plant is able to separate out the propane. I mean, propane has a freezing point of minus 40. We're chilling the LNG down to minus 262. So you can see, before the methane actually liquefies, the propane drops out. That is a resource that will come off of that plant, and just like the LNG, we're looking for a buyer. Helps to improve the economics of the plant. The propane could be used in the more rural parts of the Fairbanks North Star Borough that will never have the economics for piped distribution. But we know there are other areas that are truly more rural that are also interested in that. And I know when I was at Golden Valley and one of the existing contracts for the raw gas supply into the plant was negotiated, Golden Valley inquired at that time to see whether a larger propane stream might be secured on the North Slope. And at that time, the answer was no. But that is a component of the plant. At 9 BCF, I think the amount that was estimated to come off the plant, at 9 BCF of LNG was enough to heat about 2,000 average Fairbanks North Star Borough homes. So you can see it's a relatively modest number or amount in the whole scheme of things, but still is a valuable commodity that will be produced by the plant.
So I read a interview with Sean Parnell that happened recently. Did you raise your hand too?
You go ahead.
Okay. And he said the ASAP pipeline is going to go ahead for sure, the ANGDA pipeline. in addition to the LNG export facility. But then you're also saying that you're moving full steam ahead on the trucking plan. Isn't that a lot of infrastructure for the small amount of residents on the rail belt to pay for,
Well,
long term?
I mean, we've certainly taken a couple of really positive steps forward recently on the potential for a pipeline, but nobody's buying pipe by the mile yet. And there are a lot of big deals to yet be worked out where, it's looking positive. But the estimation of when that pipe might come to town, is out there in the future. If it showed up tomorrow, we don't have the infrastructure to use the resource at all. And we're not likely to lay, 633 miles of pipe out in the streets in the expansion territory, or necessarily another 130 miles of pipe in the core area and wait for a pipeline 10 years from now. What the trucking allows us to do is develop that infrastructure so that when a pipeline comes, if a pipeline comes, hopefully a pipeline comes, we're ready. I mean, we've been waiting for a pipeline for 30 plus years. We still don't have the infrastructure in place really to utilize it if it showed up tomorrow. Luckily, a pipeline is not a type of thing that sneaks up on you. We will see it coming. And that allows you then to make decisions on your trucking. Do you use the initial plant to start the build out? But boy, now the pipeline really takes a couple big steps forward. So you forego that future expansion because you don't want to overinvest in the plant and storage that are associated with it. So going forward through the trucking, we believe economically we can build out the distribution system that allows us to use natural gas, but also interact with other projects and hopefully not overbuild. That was one of the risk components in this. And I believe one of the things that deterred the private sector just from moving forward with it is, well, there's been talk about a pipeline, there's still talk about a pipeline. What if that renders a portion of the infrastructure, useless? And that gets to sort of the issue of, your plant capacity and how you match up the plant capacity with your storage in the community. Because of all the different components, the plant up on the North Slope is built in components that are trucked up and put together. It's certainly more complex than just bolting a couple of flatbeds together, but those components can be repurposed. They can be sent somewhere else. They could be part of that plant could be repurposed to Fairbanks if we had gas distributed or delivered on a pipeline, and then you could produce LNG in the interior that is then distributed up and down the road system to those communities that are not blessed with a pipeline coming by. The most expensive and the most risky part of the overall infrastructure is your large bulk storage in the interior community. Because if a pipeline comes, you can repurpose the plant, you can sell off the trailers, you can pull other trailers with your tractors, but you can't repurpose, you can't take apart the big LNG storage tank that's built. So that's why, some people have said, well, don't overbuild your plant, just build larger storage in the community, and then you can run your plant just, as even as it goes every day of the year, because you're putting all that product into your thermos bottle all summer long and then drawing out of the thermos bottle in the winter. There's a cost associated with each one of those components, and so you want to blend them together to hopefully achieve the lowest cost to the consumer right then, but also not run a lower risk of having a portion of a stranded asset sometime in the future. Let's see. I think the gentleman actually behind was next.
Well, now that Point Thompson is coming on and there's a lot of natural gas liquids there, is there any discussion within the state right now of right now all the propane is being re-injected by state law because it lubricates the oil fields. Now, Point Thompson is going to upset that a little bit. Is there talking right now about increasing the propane fraction that Fairbanks can get due to Point Thompson?
The gas liquids that come off of Point Thompson are going to be blended. They can be blended in with the oil pipeline. Now, what component there might be additional propane out of Point Thompson? I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. But could there be a potential increased stream of propane? I guess I need to get the answer to that. I challenged the group that I presented to this morning to stump me, and you've just stumped me. So, your question?
Yeah, I just had a quick question about going further up line before the plant. Is there any kind of agreement or talk or conversation now with the producers as to the amount of gas that you would be bringing into the plant that may, over the years, expand based on usage, or a pipeline coming that dictates, we're gonna buy it at this a price for this amount, and then if we go to this, is that gonna get better, so that we receive a, kind of a discount off of that, savings, consumer?
Well, there are two contracts that have been negotiated for access to the gas. They're both of a duration, length of time, and a quantity that can more than meet the community's needs. I know a little bit more about the Golden Valley one, but a lot of the details of those contracts have not been made public. The gas, what has been publicly stated about the price component is, it's between, at $100 oil, it's between $3 and $3.50 per MCF of gas. Right now, the commodity in Cook Inlet is, $6 or $7 per MCF of gas. So you can see that, yes, it's, a remote construction project, not the ideal place to put your plant, but the commodity that's coming into the plant is half the price of, the raw commodity in the Cook Inlet area. So I think that was very meaningful. In fact, the board, the ADA and AEA board, met in December, and things were sort of ramping up to a decision point on the partnership and the plant, who is our preferred partner in the plant, and trying to tie up that deal. But they sort of took a pause in December, and they said, okay, we hear all these things about new invigorated activity in Cook Inlet, the potential for resource out of Cook Inlet. We want an update of what's happening in Cook Inlet. And that was an appropriate thing for them to do, sort of as part of their due diligence. So they had the new director of the Division of Oil and Gas, geologist, is very sharp, used to live here in Fairbanks, come in and present, here's what we believe the potential in the Cook Inlet Basin is. Here's what's happening right now with exploration. Here's what we believe is going to happen in the future. And on all of those things, certainly with what's going on right now and what's going to happen in the future, here's the risk associated with that. Here's the risk that they will or will not find what we believe is out there. And here's the risk on what the price for that commodity is going to be. And I think after hearing that, the ADA board felt that there is the potential for Cook Inlet to be in the mix, and for the community, for interior Alaska, potentially sometime in the future, if we're still tied to a trucking operation, sourcing some of the gas from the north and some of the gas from the south, at the very least having gas in the south as an emergency backup if there's an interruption from the north, that's a good thing for the community. But at this point, the duration and the price certainty of the commodity on the North Slope indicated to the board that they should continue to push forward.
Yes, if Susitna is built, what percentage of the power would come to the northern region? I've heard a presentation before, they've divided up into like 4 different groups.
Well, at this point, we've not entered into the agreements with our potential customers, that would be the utilities, but we anticipate starting that discussion soon. And what they did for Bradley Lake, if I remember correctly, is they sort of took a snapshot of everybody's generation. Was it nameplate generation, Henry, at the time? Their load, the load that they served. They aggregated it all together. They divided out and figured out what everybody's percentage was, and that was the percentage of power that you got out of Bradley Lake. Now, whether it's the same dynamic, we might have one of the utilities that says, I'm pretty much set. I want some, but not as much. And so we'll have the discussions with those customers. And really, those customers have to present themselves and be ready to agree to sign long-term contracts to purchase that power. They're only going to do so if it looks like economically the power is a good fit in their portfolio going forward. If there's no customers, there won't be a project. Can I do one last one there? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just get together with you. Thank you very much for attending this evening.